Ball pythons are one of the most popular pet snakes in the world, and for genuinely good reasons. They're calm, they're beautiful. They don't require enormous enclosures. They tolerate handling better than almost any other snake species commonly kept in captivity. For someone stepping into the reptile hobby for the first time, a ball python seems like the obvious starting point. The ball python, Python regius, is native to the grasslands, open forests and agricultural regions of West and Central Africa. In the wild, these snakes are ambush predators. They spend significant portions of their lives inside burrows and tight, enclosed spaces where they feel hidden and protected. They're largely nocturnal. They regulate their body temperature by moving between warmer and cooler environments. They're built for humidity. Understanding that background matters enormously, because most of the mistakes stangst make trace directly back to not knowing what kind of animal a ball python actually is. The calm, manageable temperament that makes these snakes appealing in a pet store display can create a false impression that an animal this docile must also be an animal that requires very little effort to keep properly. That impression is where problems begin. Mistake 1. Not researching before purchase. The first and most foundational mistake happens before the snake ever comes home. It happens in a pet store, or at a reptile expo, or while scrolling through an online listing. Someone sees a ball python, the colouring, the quiet movement, the size, and makes the decision to purchase one without having done any meaningful preparation. The enclosure isn't ready. The temperatures haven't been set up. The basic requirements of the animal are unknown to the person now responsible for its care. This is one of the most common entry points into ball python ownership, and it creates a cascade of problems that can follow the animal for months. A ball python needs a proper enclosure waiting for it the moment it arrives home. For a juvenile, that means a minimum of a 20-gallon enclosure. For an adult female, and females grow significantly larger than males, sometimes reaching 5 feet or beyond, a 4-foot by 2-foot enclosure is the starting point, and many experienced keepers go larger than that. Inside that enclosure, a temperature gradient is essential. Ball pythons cannot generate their own body heat. They regulate their internal temperature entirely by moving between warmer and cooler zones. The warm side of the enclosure needs to reach 88 to 92 degrees Fahrenheit at the surface. The cool side should sit between 76 and 80 degrees. Ambient air temperature throughout the enclosure should remain comfortably warm. At least 2 hides are required, one positioned on the warm side and one on the cool side. This is not optional. Ball pythons are burrowing animals. An enclosed tight space isn't a luxury for them. It's a psychological necessity. A snake without proper hides will experience chronic stress, and a chronically stressed ball python stops eating. A water dish large enough for the snake to soak in should always be present. A thermostat must control any heat source. An unregulated heat mat plugged directly into a wall socket can burn a snake through the substrate without any visible warning signs. The solution to this mistake is straightforward and requires only time. Research before purchasing. Set the enclosure up completely. Dial in the temperatures over several days until they're stable. Then bring the snake home into an environment that is genuinely ready for it. Preparation isn't an advanced step in reptile keeping. It is the foundation that every other aspect of care is built upon. Mistake 2. Improper humidity and wrong substrate. The second mistake produces one of the most visible and preventable health problems in ball python keeping, and it comes down to getting the enclosure environment wrong in a very specific way. Ball pythons require humidity levels between 60 and 80% under normal conditions. During shedding cycles, that range should increase to 80 or 90%. These animals evolved in humid environments. Their physiology depends on consistent moisture in the air around them. When humidity is chronically too low, the shedding process breaks down. Instead of coming off cleanly in a single complete piece, the skin fragments, it tears. Pieces remain stuck to the body. This condition is called dissectosis, incomplete or problem shedding, and it concentrates most dangerously around two areas. The first is the eyes. Ball pythons don't have eyelids. Their eyes are covered by a specialized transparent scale called the eye cap, or spectacle. Retained eye caps trap moisture against the eye, create pressure, and can lead to infection and lasting eye damage if not addressed properly. The second is the tail tip. Retained shed that accumulates around the tail can restrict circulation over time. In severe or chronic cases, the tail tip can die from lack of blood flow. This is a permanent, entirely preventable injury. The substrate chosen for the enclosure plays as a central role in maintaining appropriate humidity. Many beginners use reptile carpet or paper towels because they're inexpensive and simple to clean. Paper towels serve a reasonable purpose in quarantine setups or with very young hatchlings, but they contribute almost nothing to humidity retention. In a permanent enclosure, cocoa fiber, cypress mulch, and bioactive substrate mixes are the recommended choices for ball pythons. These materials hold moisture effectively, allow for natural burrowing behavior, and maintain the environmental conditions the animal needs. Cypress mulch is widely available at hardware stores for a fraction of the cost of branded reptile products. A digital hygrometer placed inside the enclosure provides accurate, reliable humidity readings. Guessing is not sufficient. Humidity should be checked regularly and adjusted through misting or enclosure modifications when levels drop below the appropriate range. A clean, complete shed, one unbroken piece, is a reliable indicator of a healthy enclosure environment. Fragmented, partial sheds are a signal that something needs to change. Mistake 3. Assuming the snake ate when it didn't. The third mistake is deceptively simple. It doesn't involve complex equipment or specialized knowledge. It involves an assumption, a reasonable seeming assumption that turns out to be wrong in ways that create real problems. The scenario unfolds like this. A feeding session takes place. A frozen thawed prey item is offered inside the enclosure or in a separate feeding container. The owner steps away to give the snake space and privacy, which is actually good feeding practice. When they return, the prey item is gone. The natural conclusion is that the snake ate. Sometimes that conclusion is correct, sometimes it isn't. Ball pythons, particularly younger animals, newly acquired snakes still adjusting to a new environment, and individuals going through a fasting period will occasionally move prey items rather than consume them. The mouse or rat gets pushed into a corner. It disappears under a layer of substrate. It ends up behind a hide where it isn't visible during a casual glance at the enclosure, and then it sits there, decomposing slowly, out of sight, in an enclosed warm environment. The consequences of a decomposing prey item in an enclosure extend beyond the obvious unpleasantness. Bacterial growth in a warm, humid enclosure can create conditions that are genuinely harmful to the animal living inside it. It also corrupts feeding records, which matter more than many new owners realize. Tracking feeding history is one of the most practical tools available for monitoring a ball python's health. A snake that misses 1 or 2 feedings occasionally is generally not cause for alarm. A snake that hasn't successfully eaten in 6 to 8 weeks or longer warrants closer attention and potentially a veterinary consultation. The fix requires only a brief habit. After every feeding session, before recording a successful meal, do a thorough check of the entire enclosure. Look inside both hides. Check corners. Feel beneath the substrate. Confirm visually and physically that the prey item is genuinely gone, consumed, not relocated. It's also worth addressing one of the most common concerns raised by new ball python owners: fasting. Ball pythons are capable of refusing food for extended periods, weeks, and in some cases months, without it constituting a medical emergency. This behavior is normal, documented, and built into their biology. The key distinction is between a snake that is genuinely refusing food and a snake that appears to have eaten when it hasn't. Most feeding refusals in ball pythons have an environmental explanation. Enclosure temperatures that are too low suppress the feeding response significantly. Inadequate hides create stress that interferes with normal behavior. Handling sessions too close to feeding time can cause snakes to regurgitate or refuse prey. Addressing the environment almost always addresses the behavior. Know when your snake last ate. Know what it ate. Know with certainty that it actually ate it. Mistake 4. Treating the snake as a fashion accessory. The fourth mistake is less about husbandry, mechanics, and more about a fundamental misunderstanding of what a ball python actually experiences. Ball pythons are visually striking animals. Their patterns, their movement, their quiet presence. These qualities naturally make people want to share them. There is nothing inherently wrong with handling a ball python, or with being proud of an impressive animal. Handling, done correctly, is beneficial for socialization and for building trust between the snake and its keeper. The problem emerges when handling crosses from interaction into exhibition, when the snake becomes a prop taken into crowded grocery stores, loud public spaces, social gatherings, or anywhere else defined by unpredictable noise, unfamiliar smells, and constant movement. Ball pythons experience the world through a combination of heat sensing, vibration detection, and chemoreception, the ability to taste chemical information in the air through their tongue. An environment full of unknown scents, loud sounds, and erratic movement is not a neutral experience for these animals. It is a genuinely stressful one. A ball python that appears calm in an overwhelming environment is not necessarily a relaxed animal. Snakes under significant stress often enter a defensive frozen state, holding perfectly still, minimizing movement, and waiting for the threat to pass. This response can look like contentment to an inexperienced observer. It is not. Responsible handling follows a few well-established guidelines. Ball pythons should not be handled for a minimum of 48 hours following a feeding. The digestion process requires stable temperatures and minimal disturbance, and premature handling can cause regurgitation, which is physically taxing on the animal. Snakes in shed should not be handled. The eye caps cloud during the shedding process, reducing vision and increasing defensiveness. Handling sessions should be kept to a reasonable length and should always be guided by the animal's actual behavior rather than the owner's schedule. A comfortable ball python moves with fluid, exploratory curiosity. Its tongue works steadily, sampling the environment. A stressed or defensive ball python pulls its head back, holds rigidly still, hisses, or positions itself to strike. Learning to read that difference is not advanced reptile keeping. It is basic respect for the animal in the keeper's care. Mistake 5. Leaving live rodents unattended. The fifth mistake is the most serious one on this list. It is also the most preventable, and it continues to injure and kill ball pythons with alarming regularity, almost entirely because owners don't fully understand danger until after something goes wrong. The mistake is leaving a live rodent unattended inside an enclosure with a ball python. Some keepers choose to feed live prey. That decision involves its own set of considerations. But the critical point, the one that applies regardless of that choice, is this. If live prey is offered, the entire feeding process must be supervised from beginning to end. The owner cannot leave the room, cannot get distracted, cannot assume the snake will handle the situation independently. Here is what actually happens in an unsupervised enclosure with a live rodent. Mice bite, rats bite with considerably more force and considerably more persistence. A rodent that has been placed in an enclosed space with a predator and has no means of escape is an animal fighting for its survival. If the ball python is not immediately hungry, if it strikes and misses, or if it simply isn't in a feeding response at that moment, the rodent does not remain passive. It attacks. The ball python, confined within the enclosure, cannot retreat. It cannot escape. It is entirely dependent on its keeper to remove a threat it cannot escape on its own. The injuries that result from unsupervised live feeding are severe. Deep lacerations across the body, wounds to the face and eyes, injuries serious enough to require veterinary intervention, injuries serious enough to be fatal. The recommended solution is to transition to frozen thawed prey. Frozen thawed rodents are widely available through reptile suppliers and specialty pet stores. They are less expensive than live feeders in most markets. They carry a lower risk of parasites and bacterial transmission. They pose zero physical danger to the snake. For snakes that initially refuse frozen thawed prey, which is common in animals that were raised on live feeders, transition techniques exist and work reliably with patients. Warming the thawed prey item more thoroughly, so that its surface temperature more closely mimics a live animal, often triggers a feeding response. Introducing scent by braining the prey item, a technique involving a small incision to release internal scent, is another commonly used and effective method. For keepers who remain committed to live feeding, the rule is absolute. Stay present, watch every feeding. Remove the live rodent immediately if the snake does not engage within a reasonable period of time. This is not an inconvenient guideline. It is the minimum standard of responsible care. 5 mistakes, 5 preventable situations that cause real harm to animals in the care of owners who, in most cases, genuinely wanted to do right by them. Not researching before purchase, getting humidity and substrate wrong, assuming a feeding was successful without confirming it, treating the snake as a social accessory rather than a living animal with real stress, responses, and leaving live rodents unsupervised in an enclosure. None of these mistakes require advanced knowledge to avoid. They require awareness. They require preparation. They require the willingness to understand what a ball python actually is. Not what it looks like in a display tank, but what it needs, how it experiences the world, and what it depends on its keeper to provide. Ball pythons are exceptional animals. Kept properly, they are calm, long-lived, and genuinely rewarding companions. The hobby of reptile keeping at its best is built on exactly that kind of informed, respectful ownership. The information exists, the resources are available. The only remaining step is using them.